Hello everybody, welcome again to another story from the Milledgeville Public Library of Illinois. The story we have for you today comes from Europe, and it is a story about a young man who found a very interesting way to have revenge on someone who wronged him. This is the story of the donkey cabbages. Once long ago there was a bold and handsome young hunter. He was very good at his job, and he was also very in love. You see, there was a young girl in the village who was very pretty, and no one else had really made friends with her because, unfortunately, her mother was a witch. And yes, the hunter fell in love with the witch's daughter. Well, one day, the witch went to her daughter and she said, "Daughter, I have found out something about your bold young hunter. Apparently, he has a very, very valuable thing." The daughter thought about it for a moment. She said, "What is that, mother?" And her mother said, "He has a wishing cloak. He could wrap it around his shoulders and wish to be anywhere in the world, and he is there." And her daughter said, "Well, yes, mother. He once took me to the top of the mountain so we could see the sunset. Yes, I know he has this cloak." And her mother said, "Well, I wish to own it myself. So you are going to help me get it, daughter." Now, you have to understand that the witch's daughter didn't want to do anything bad, but her mother was a witch, and she was rather under her power, and she didn't always have the ability to say no to what her mother told her to do. And this was one of those times. Her mother said to her, "What you must do, daughter, is you must sit in the window, and when your lover comes to visit you the next time, you must be staring out the window, very sad looking, and staring at the Garnet Mountain." "Right, mother. I think I can do that. But how is that going to get you the wishing cloak?" She said, "Well, when he asks you why you look so sad, you will tell him that you wish to go to the Garnet Mountain and gather some of the precious jewels that are there on the slopes of the mountain." "But mother, it's very dangerous and a very difficult journey through very rough mountains to get there. It would be very difficult to go and gather those stones." And the witch said, "Well, silly girl, he has the wishing cloak. He'll just wrap you up in it and take you up there with him, and you'll go and you can gather some of the stones, and then when you're done gathering the stones, because of course they're quite valuable and we want some of those too to sell and get some money, but when you're done gathering the stones, then you're going to give him a drink out of this wineskin that I have prepared. And then he'll fall asleep. And when he falls asleep, you take the cloak and you wrap it around your own shoulders and you wish yourself home." "All right, mother." And so it happened exactly as the witch had said that it would. The next time that the bold young hunter came to visit his love, he found her sitting sadly and staring out the window, looking up at the mountain and sighing. And she looked so sad and she looked so unhappy that he asked her what was wrong. And she told him that she wanted to go to the Garnet Mountain and gather some of the stones. And he wrapped his arms around her and he said, "Don't sigh, my love. I'll take you there." And he wrapped them both up in the wishing cloak. And he wished to be on the slopes of the Garnet Mountain. And suddenly they were there. And the witch's daughter, she pretended to be very, very happy, and she ran about all over gathering stones. But it was a bit hot that day, and so she said, "Darling, wouldn't you like a drink from this wine? It's so hot out today. I'm sure you must need to rest a little bit before we go back." And, well, he was a bit thirsty, and so he took a big drink from the wineskin, and before too long he was asleep, because of course the witch had put a sleeping potion in it. And the witch's daughter, well, she really wasn't happy about it, but her mother had her under her power, so she couldn't stop herself. And she unhooked the cloak from her love's around his neck, and she took it up. She made sure she had the stones in her pocket and the wine flask beside her, and she wrapped the wishing cloak round her shoulders, and she looked sadly at the man that she loved. And then she wished to be home, and she was. Well, later that day, when the bold young hunter woke up, there was no love, no wishing cloak, no wine, and he knew he had been betrayed. And he sat there on the ground thinking about it, and he was so upset that he laid himself back down and he closed his eyes, and he was just thinking about how terrible it was that his love had done this to him, and that her mother had made her, and it was awful, and everything was wrong and terrible. Well, while he was laying there thinking about it, a couple of giants wandered by. They lived nearby in the forest on the slopes of the mountain. And as they wandered closer, they saw him lying there. And one of the giants picked up his foot like he was going to squash the bold young hunter who was lying there on the ground like a bug. And his brother looked at him and said, No, don't bother squashing him. It's a little earthworm. He was like a little ant or something. He's so small, it doesn't matter. He'll die anyway. He won't be able to get back through the mountains to get home, and he'll never make it up to the summit. You know, if you get up to the summit, the clouds will carry him away, and he'll fall from the sky. Don't bother with him, brother. Let's just go home and get our lunch. So the two giants, without squishing the young hunter, went off back to their home. Well, the young hunter had listened to this whole conversation, and he thought, well, that's interesting. Because you see, he had thought he was going to have to try to get back through the mountains to get back to his home and to get revenge on the witch and her daughter. But now he knew that he could just climb to the summit and let the clouds carry him away. Yes, it might be a little bit dangerous, but he was a hunter. He liked things just a little bit dangerous. And so he climbed up to the top of the mountain, the summit of the mountain. It was not easy, but he did it. And when he got up to the summit of the mountain, he found, much to his surprise, that the clouds were indeed quite big and puffy, and he could quite easily climb up on top of one of them and sit there. And as long as he didn't move around too much, it just kind of floated and didn't get rocky and bumpy. And so he just sat on top of the cloud, and every once in a while he would look down over the side just to kind of see where he might be. But of course, he didn't recognize anything underneath him because he'd never been through that part of the mountains before. Well, the cloud floated along for a while with the young hunter on top, and then it started to kind of float down towards the ground a little more. And the young hunter was just starting to think that he might have to jump off and land, well, goodness knew where. And then he realized the cloud had stopped moving, and it was just hovering not too far above the ground, right above a very big cabbage patch. So the young hunter decided this was the safest time to get off the cloud. And so he jumped down off of the cloud, and as soon as he did, it floated back up to the sky and floated away. Now, it had been many, many hours by this time, and the young hunter was rather hungry. He wasn't particularly fond of cabbage. It wasn't his favorite thing to eat in the whole wide world. But he was hungry, and it was there. And so he reached down and he took a couple of leaves off of one of the cabbages near his feet, and he started eating them. Now, raw cabbage is okay, but it's not necessarily the tastiest food in the world. And the young hunter was just kind of chewing on it and thinking about how he was going to try to get revenge on the witch and her daughter, when suddenly he felt something funny on his head, and his back felt kind of itchy. And the next thing he realized, he had grown ears on his head, big, long, tall ones, and his front arms had turned into long legs with hoofs at the end, and he had long legs in the back with hoofs at the end, and a tail, and a fuzzy back, and he was a donkey. A donkey. Oh, great, he thought. How could this day get any worse? First I'm betrayed by my love and her mother, and now I'm a donkey. This is great. But donkeys, they eat more than humans. So those couple of leaves that he had eaten off the cabbage that had taken the hunger pains out of his human belly weren't enough to take the hunger pains out of his donkey belly. And so he kind of wandered around the cabbage patch a little bit until he found a cabbage over near the wall that smelled really good. And he started eating it. And he ate the whole thing. And then all of a sudden, he realized he wasn't chewing with the donkey mouth anymore. He was chewing with the human mouth, and his ears were gone, and his arms were back, and his tail was gone, and his back was all smooth again. And he wasn't a donkey anymore. He was a man again. So then he started thinking, these must be donkey cabbages. I've heard of these. They can turn you into a donkey if you eat the wrong cabbage. And then if you eat the right cabbage, they'll turn you back into a person. I have an idea, he thought. And so he went over by the wall where the human cabbages were, and he cut off one of those. And then he went back over where he had first eaten from, and he cut off one of the donkey cabbages, and he kept them very carefully. He made sure he knew which one was which, and he took them with him. And he climbed over the wall of that garden, and he started off back toward his home. He had to ask directions a couple of times to make sure he was going the right way. But eventually, he got close to where his love lived with her mother, the witch. And he went into the forest when he got closer, and he changed his clothes into some that were more ragged that he had bought on his way back from the cabbage patch. And he took some berries and some dirt, and he rubbed them together, and he made his face look darker. And he made himself look like a farmer. Kind of a dirty farmer, but a farmer. And he took those 2 cabbages, and he had them in his bags, and he went down the road, and when he got to the witch's house, he knocked on the door. And she came to the door, and she said, "What do you want, beggar man?" And he said, "I'm not a beggar man. I'm a farmer, and I'm taking some cabbages to the king. He asked for them special because they're very special cabbages. And I was just wondering, I'm rather thirsty. Might you have a drink of water that I could have?" Wow, when the witch heard that this was a farmer taking cabbages to the king, she wanted to see these beautiful cabbages that were so special. And so she invited the supposed farmer into the house, and she gave him a drink of water. And she said, I'm just curious, maybe possibly could I see the special cabbages you're taking to the king? And the young hunter said, "Well, surely." And he took the 2 cabbages out of his bag. And the witch said, "Oh, well, they do look delicious and wonderful and very special. Do you know, I have this dish that I've been wanting to make, but it just takes a leaf or 2 of cabbage. Do you think maybe possibly I could have just a leaf or 2 of the cabbage, and I could try making my dish with that?" And the young hunter said, "Well, I don't see why not." And he broke 2 or 3 leaves off of the cabbage that turned people into donkeys, and he gave them to the witch. Well, the witch, she took them straight to the kitchen, and she immediately started making her little dish with them. And as soon as the food was done, she was so greedy, she didn't even wait to call her daughter or the maidservant in to have some. No. She tried it herself immediately. She gobbled up several bites. And you know what? She turned into a donkey. A pretty old, pretty scrawny looking donkey, but a donkey. And she kicked up her heels and she brayed a little bit and she ran out the door into the yard. She was so startled. Well, right after the witch ran out into the yard, the maidservant came down from upstairs. Now, she was supposed to be making the beds and tidying the rooms, but she had smelled something that smelled wonderful, and she was hoping that her mistress might not be in the kitchen and that she could sneak a mouthful or two of whatever smelled so wonderful. And since her mistress was not in the kitchen because she was out in the yard getting used to being a donkey, the maidservant snitched a couple of bites, and she too turned into a donkey and went running out into the yard. Well, a few minutes later, where the young farmer was waiting in the parlor, the witch's daughter came in. And she talked to him a little bit, and she found out who he was and why he was there. And she said, well, I can't imagine what's keeping my mother. I'll go look for her. And the young hunter said, oh, no, let me. I'll go see where she's at. And he took his 2 cabbages with him, and he went into the kitchen. And he found that the witch wasn't there, and there were 2 donkeys in the yard. And so he kind of guessed that the maidservant maybe had a bite of that food. And he took what was left of the food, and he brought it into the witch's daughter, and he said, well, I couldn't find your mother, but she left this in the kitchen. I'm sure she meant for you to have it. You should try it. Well, the witch's daughter was a little shy, and she offered some to the young, well, she thought he was a farmer. And he said, no, he had eaten. He was not hungry. And so she had a couple of bites of the food, and it was very delicious, and she had a couple more bites. And suddenly she too turned into a donkey, a very pretty young donkey, but a donkey nonetheless. And she too ran out into the yard. Well, the young hunter, he went through the house and he found the bathroom. And in the bathroom, he washed all of the dirt and the mud and the berry stain off of his face. And he put on his own nice hunting clothes, and he went out to the yard with a piece of rope. And he stood there and he scolded those donkeys. This is what you get when you betray someone terribly badly, and when you're greedy and you try to take something that does not belong to you. And he tied those 3 donkeys together with his rope, and he went down the road to the nearest mill. And when he got there, he said to the miller, Miller, I have come into possession of these 3 donkeys, and I have no use for them. I'm a hunter. I don't need donkeys. I have a mind to leave them here and let you use them. But I have a few rules. All right, said the miller. He could always use some good donkeys to help him in the mill and carrying things around. He said, what are the rules? He said, well, you see this old scrawny donkey here? This donkey should only get 1 meal every day, and it should be beaten 3 times a day. Not harshly, but beaten 3 times a day. All right, said the miller, I think I can do that. Anything else? Well, yes, you see this donkey here, the kind of medium one. This one should get 2 meals a day and 1 beating every day. All right, said the miller, I think I can do that. 1 meal, 3 beatings, 2 meals, 1 beating, right? And the young pretty one? Well, they see the young pretty donkey, she should get 3 meals a day, and, well, the hunter, he was angry still a little bit, but he was still in love with the witch's daughter, and he couldn't bear the thought of her being punished. And so he said, well, she shouldn't get any beatings. All right, said the miller, 1 meal, 3 beatings, 2 meals, 1 beating, 3 meals, no beatings. I've got it. I think I can handle that for you, sir. And the hunter said, very well, I'll be back in a week. And he went off back to his home to do his hunting. Well, at the end of the week, he went back to the mill to see how the donkeys were doing. And when he came up to the miller, he said, Miller, hello, how are the donkeys doing? And the miller said, well, I have bad news for you, sir. You see, the old scrawny donkey, She was so bad-tempered. She refused to work, she refused to eat, and, well, she died. The young hunter said, well, that's too bad. What about the other two? And he said, well, they're right around the corner here. Let's go see them. And so they went around to see the two donkeys. Well, the two donkeys were standing tied next to the mill, with their heads hanging low and just looking so sad and so dejected that the hunter's heart was touched. He felt sorry for them. And so he said, Miller, I think I've changed my mind. I think I'll take these two donkeys with me anyway, and here's a couple of gold pieces for your trouble. Well, the miller really wasn't too sad about it, because all of that feeding different how many meals and how many beatings, it was all so confusing. And he had a donkey already that helped him in the mill, and these two had just kind of been extra trouble. And so he thanked the young hunter very much and took the coins, and the young hunter took the donkeys with them. And he took them back to the witch's house. And he took them to the yard, and he said, are you feeling sorry for what you did? And both of the donkeys nodded their heads. And so he went into the house, and he took the human cabbage, and he cut it in half, and he took it back out to the garden, and he gave half to each of the donkeys. And as soon as the maidservant turned back into a human, she ran back upstairs to make the beds and tidy the rooms, feeling very, very, very bad about sneaking some food, and decided she would never do it again. And as soon as the witch's daughter, the young girl, turned back into a human, she fell at the hunter's feet and she said, please, please, please forgive me. I didn't want to do anything to you, but my mother, she had me in her power. I couldn't stop myself. I had to do what she said. Please forgive me. I love you so very much. Well, the hunter was touched, and he said, you know, I still love you too. I forgive you. And he took her and he raised her up, and they went into the house together. And she said, oh, by the way, your wishing cloak, I have it. It's hanging here in the cupboard. You can take it back. And he said, no, let it hang in the cupboard. I don't need it right now, because the best wish of my heart is to marry you. Will you marry me? And she said, oh, yes, I will. And you know, after that, they never used that wishing cloak again, because they didn't need it, because they were so happy together. And they passed it on to their children and their children's children. And, well, one of them might have used it once upon a time, but that would be a story for another day. And that is the story of the donkey cabbages. I hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you again on Monday at 3 p.m. Central Daylight Time here from the Milledgeville Public Library of Illinois. We'll have another story for you. Don't forget, if you want to see any of our stories again, or if you missed some of them, you can just scroll down on our Facebook page and they're all still there. So we'll see you again next week. I hope you have a great week. Bye.